If Victoria's latest lockdown mess was a movie, I mean, you'd turn it off because you'd say that the plot just isn't plausible. How can a state that's bungled hotel quarantine so often get it wrong again? But yet that's what it seems to be behind the latest round of community transmission of the so-called dreaded Delta variant from India.
All labs in Australia to upload any data they had, and we went back to those 7 swabs the Doherty did extra work to try and get usable information out of that. They were able to get a high quality sequence out of that, and then that link was made yesterday.
Last week, you'll recall, the so-called experts here were trying to blame it all on New South Wales, given one of the families involved took ill while holidaying on the New South Wales South Coast. New South Wales Health Minister Brad Hazzard was quick to push back.
There is no evidence whatsoever that this family picked up the variant in New South Wales. There's no evidence equally that they picked it up in Victoria. There is simply no evidence at this time.
But still, officials in Melbourne, well, they did everything they could to avoid fessing up with the truth. Until today, when there was no way to get around the reality that lockdown number 4 was driven by yet another stuff-up from a quarantine management system that's about as porous as Swiss cheese and a testing regime that's let Victorians down yet again.
And the process is that there's a quality control process that's gone through after that barcode is read, and it had failed twice.
It's worth reminding Victorians here that the state's hotel quarantine system is costing them as taxpayers over $1 million a day to run, and still no one running it seems to be able to learn from their mistakes. That's why the sham that was last year's Coat inquiry matters so much. If people never admit to mistakes or policy failures, big government systems don't get fixed and the damage keeps occurring. Not helping either is that many of the recommendations of the Coat inquiry were never implemented, and that lies and cover-up are just standard operating procedure for the Andrews government, regardless of who is in charge.
I can't specifically recall.
I can't recall. I presume I did.
I don't recall the conversation.
And I have some memory, but not full memory.
I don't recall specifically.
Not to my recollection. I have no recollection of that.
I can't specifically recall.
The woman in charge of the hotel quarantine operation today, well, she's the same woman who tried to claim a man wrongly used an asthma nebuliser in his hotel room back in February without permission. That was lockdown number 3. Later, official reports showed it was hotel procedures that caused the outbreak, not the man with the nebuliser. But no apology then from the quarantine head, Emma Cassar. Today too, this interesting exchange between her and the Australian newspaper's Rachel Baxendale over infected COVID bed linen being stored in a car park that's shared between an apartment block and a quarantine hotel.
But what residents have been telling me is that there are people who need to get to their bike cage who've been moving past this medical waste and to an exit that they have access to in this shared car park area.
The only other thing, Rachel, that we can add is that we've actually offered to sit down with residents and talk this stuff through.
Residents raised these concerns, I understand, in mid-April. Why are you only offering to sit down with them now? And why is sitting down with them even an option? Surely a quarantine hotel, by definition, should be completely separate from an area that residents are moving in and out of.
We've always put the offer on the table, and we always will if there are residents that are concerned.
No, not her fault now either. Forgive me if I don't find her denials compelling. Nor could I believe this exchange with the acting Premier still committed to bringing in plane loads of travellers, even though this admission today about where the Delta virus came from proves that yet again, this government can't be trusted to run hotel quarantine.
Going into winter, we paused flights for 4 or 5 months last year. So your government's clearly not shy about shutting the door. Would you potentially consider reducing the number of people coming into the state over winter if, say, there is concern about an IPC breach, or if an IPC breach is confirmed? Would you consider action to actually just reduce the risk?
No, there's no changes in our plans in terms of the number of return travellers who will be accessing hotel quarantine.
What's that definition of insanity again? Doing the same thing again and again, but expecting a different result? Well, there they go. To try and make sure the nightly TV news programs didn't lead with the shock and horror that this latest lockdown was the fault of yet another stuff-up in hotel quarantine, the acting Premier was quick today to talk up the likelihood that Melbourne's lockdown will end at midnight on Thursday.
Thanks to the outstanding work of our contact tracing team, we remain on track to deliver a further easing of restrictions in regional Victoria and easing of restrictions in Melbourne. That's
called Political Management 101. Yesterday, they couldn't answer questions on this lockdown ending early or even on time, but today, with their backs against the wall and desperate to change the political conversation, boy, they talked it up, didn't they? Amazing what 24 hours and a genomic link confirming your own incompetence does to sharpen the mind of a politician. More to today on the farcical argument that Labor are trying to get up, that even if Victoria's hotel quarantine has failed, it's really all the Prime Minister's fault.
The fact that Howard Springs is the only system in the country that has seen no breaches really speaks for itself. That's why we pushed so hard to get a purpose-built quarantine facility. Howard Springs is the only facility in this country that has not seen a breach, and that's exactly why we've been pushing for this purpose-built facility.
Now, James Molino should know Howard Springs was not a purpose-built infectious diseases quarantine centre. I've toured it a number of times. I don't think he probably has. It was used accommodation for mining workers, as a detention facility for illegal boat arrivals. It wasn't built to do what it does now. That doesn't really matter. It doesn't actually matter who builds what, only who runs it. Victoria might get Canberra to build them this new $200 million brand new facility, probably out at Avalon Airport. But what's going to change here, given the same clowns will run it? The same Emma Cassars who stuffed up in February and stuffed up again today, they'll all be in charge. That's the problem. It's like the spin from the Premier declaring Victoria's gold standard tracing system.
I'm very confident that we have a system that is worthy of being copied by others, and it is. If it was anything other than leading, and this is not about boasting, so this is just a fact. If it was anything other than one of the best systems, the AMA over in WA were calling it the gold standard. They're not terms I use, but that's what they said. If it was anything other than a good system, then I doubt very much that other First Ministers across the country would have agreed to copy it.
Poor Dan. It hasn't aged well, has it? Living through lockdown number 4, there's hardly a Victorian in the state who believes that gold standard anymore. Fed a constant diet of lies, plus the blatant refusal of government to make public the so-called expert health advisor Brett Sutton, or the damning report into the self-harm and suicide impact of these lockdowns on Victoria's young people. This is a regime that's made secrecy an art form. If only there were recall powers for the people of this state to demand an early election and send this government packing. Send them packing before lockdowns 5, 6, 7, 8, because they're coming, before they destroy what's little left of an economy in this state and the morale that isn't already shot to pieces.